I worked for the Highway Department for 44 years from 1970 to 2014. And like Walt said, the last 20 years I was involved with the federal program. And part of that, funds could be used for historic surface transportation projects, meaning land or water. So that's why we could fund the carriage house, the shelter at Camp Hancock, and also we did some digs at Double Ditch and Minokan and stuff. My mom lived at the Touchmark retirement community for a few years in the early 2000s. And when I retired, I wanted to kind of give back to that place, so I started doing lectures there in 2016 in the fall. So this will be my 4th year now that I've been doing them. And most of them have been highway related, stuff I was involved with, either history of the highway department or projects directly involved with. And every once in a while I branch out into something else, and that is, one of those was the A.W. Lucas Company, which was Bismarck Shopping Center from 1899 to 1982. And we got to start here with the fire in Bismarck of 1898 that burned a good portion of our downtown, and I just looked it up this morning to make sure it was like from 4th Street. So where the Lucas store was going to be built, that's where part of the fire was. And when there's fire or a disaster, there's always an opportunity for somebody. And for Arthur Lucas and William O'Hara, that opportunity lied to the west. Both of those guys were working for Field, Schlick and Company in St. Paul, and they had been working there for about 10 years. Arthur Lucas was born in 1869 in Germany and came to the United States with his family. William O'Hara, I'm not 100% certain, but I believe he was born in Ireland, because later on in the 20s I found reference where he went back to Ireland to visit siblings. So those two guys worked together for 10 years and then decided to go to Bismarck. And they got to work with C.B. Little, who built this building in 1899 after the fire. And somehow they made an arrangements to start their store there. And the Bismarck Tribune, when they're talking about this building, they said it was one of the first buildings to have that block-style sign in the city of Bismarck. And the Tribune also calls Lucas and O'Hara old and experienced dry goods men. But Arthur Lucas was only 30 years old when he came here. So but he had 10 years of experience. And the store was getting ready to open, and they did open in September 1899. Stood for high quality clothing. You're going to see a lot of ads over this talk, and the date on the bottom of the ads is when it ran in the Bismarck Tribune. Almost everything here is the Bismarck Tribune stuff. Those first ones were from Minneapolis papers, and there will be another Minneapolis photos coming up. But quick sales, small profits, high grade and popular price goods. A.W.'s wife arrives in November of 1899. And Walt talked about Christmas. Well, right away in December 1989, they were selling useful holiday gifts. And the holiday trade, and that was always a big one all the way on. So they're in business 1899. But after about 1.5 years or 2 years in business, there's a split in the partnership. And I don't know what happened exactly. These guys stayed friends over time, but Lucas buys out O'Hara, and it just becomes the A.W. Lucas Company. And O'Hara starts a grocery store in Bismarck, and he runs that for a while. And then he ends up being a clerk at the Patterson Hotel, and he stays there until 1930, and then he goes out to California to live with family. They had a 5-year lease on the building with C.B. Little, and that went from 1899 to 1904. And Lucas needed more space, so again, he hires C.B. Little to build him his new building on 4th Street there. So they've got pre-removal clearance sales, you know, stuff like that you'd see today. And you can see some of the hats they wore and the dress goods. Always got bargains. In 1904, as the business was getting going again, the A.W. Lucas Company, Lucas incorporates with his brothers-in-law. His wife's last name was Kohler. The Kohler family came from Watertown, Minnesota, which is due west of the Twin Cities. And her brothers were both doctors, G.A. Kohler, George, and then C.H. Kohler was also a doctor. So he incorporates with those folks and Emma and A.W. So there's this family corporation, and it always stayed a family corporation over time. C.H. Kohler was a baseball fan. And in 1906, in the Twin Cities, he was going to a game in Nicollet Avenue at the stadium there. And he's driving to the stadium, and he hears the noise from the crowd, and there's a little bump in his coat, and he's in his car. And he gets in the stadium, and he finds out what's going on. Some slugger hits a home run out of the park. And one of the things they did was wave their handkerchiefs or scarves, and Kohler digs into his pocket to get his scarf, and he pulls out a baseball. And it was a new baseball with a dent in it. And it was verified that it was the one that the guy hit out of the stadium. So that was a big hit caught. Their oldest son, Christian, was an enterprising young man. He started working in the store at a fairly young age. And in 1909, he won an open-faced gold watch with rubies for selling the most Saturday Evening Post subscriptions in North Dakota. And there was an inscription on it, and it said, "Presented to Christian Lucas by Cyrus Curtis, president of the Curtis Publishing Company, for unusual service rendered to the Saturday Evening Post." And there was also a time when they needed young boys to do work around the store, and Christian was responsible for hiring those. And there was an ad in the Tribune that said, young boys wanted to come to the work at the Lucas store, looking for about 20, we'll pay you. And one of you is going to win a Shetland pony, a cart, and a harness. And some of you will be able to come to work then eventually for the company, and we will make sure it works around your school time. And Lucas Company was more than just clothing in the early days. You could get rakes and brooms, and that upper left-hand corner is a clothes basket. They sold furniture in the 1910s, and you could also get shades for your porch. The very first fashion show in Bismarck most likely was the Lucas Company fashion show in October 1915, and was held at the Grand Theater, which I believe was on Main Avenue in Bismarck, and it really was a spectacle. It starts out with a movie from the Gossard Corset Company. And Gossard they had a contest for some people to what's really good or what's nice things about Gossard corsets. And a lady won that contest, and Gossard did a little movie about this lady winning that. So the fashion show had corsets and day wear and evening wear, and they had people from 6 years old all the way up to the young ladies and women. Lucas would bring in furniture, so for when they were doing the corsets, he had his bedroom furniture up there. And then when that got done, they took those out. When the day wear and stuff was being shown, then they made a park scene on the stage, and they took those out. And then evening wear clothes, they made it look like your living room. They had singers and piano players, so it was really a great production. And the Tribune said it was like the first fashion show in Bismarck. And fashion shows went on forever. This lady here is Mary Porter, and she married Alfred Olson later on. And she lived in Hazleton. And she was working for the banker's wife in Hazleton, who was a Lenhart, who her son, who I know here, and he lives in Bismarck, said he thinks the Hazleton banker Lenhart was related to the drugstore Lenhart guy here in town. But anyhow, Mrs. Lenhart makes a bet with Mary that if Mary could get a date with a guy in Hazleton by the name of Weaver, she would buy Mary an outfit at Lucas. And Mary gets the bet. She wins the bet. So Mary gets on the train and comes up to Bismarck to the A.W. Lucas store, and she buys this black skirt and white blouse. And this photograph is probably really important because it's likely it might be the only photograph that's verified of an outfit from the Lucas Company in the 1910s. So this is a real important photograph. And I've known the Olsons for a long time, and just like 2 weeks ago, I learned about this story. A.W. was a very civic-minded man. He was on the city commission from 1909 to 1913, and he was also the mayor from 1913 to 1921. I did find in 1917 that his former partner, William O'Hara, ran against him for mayor. But Lucas won. And after 21, Lenhart became mayor. In 1916, there was a brochure, maybe you've come across this before, but promoting Bismarck, the businesses and the parks and everything. And this is a photo from that brochure promoting Bismarck. So you kind of get an idea what the interior of the store was like in 1916. The nice glass cases and stuff, it probably was an elegant store. The Lucas Company also had undertaking services there, as well as the Webb Brothers store, their competitors. They also had undertaking. And in 1917, at Easter, the Missouri River was flooding. And there were businessmen over on the Mandan side that wanted to get home or to Bismarck to be with their families for Easter. And part of the railroad grade was washed out or in a condition that you couldn't get trains across. So a lot of people then would take boats across the river. And this was Saturday morning, Saturday midday, the day before Easter. And there were 6 men that got into a boat on the Mandan side, and the river was flooded, so it was all the way east or west, almost into town over there. So they get in a boat, and they get maybe 150 feet offshore, 150 yards, and they determine we better go back to Mandan. We can't get across. They turn around. One account I read, the boat hits a fence, capsizes, and 5 of the 6 men drowned. And 4 of them were from Bismarck. and some of them get hung up in the barbed wire fence. So anyhow, the businessmen helped rescue or retrieve the bodies and stuff. One guy survived. Two of the bodies in the Bismarck men were in the Lucas Funeral Parlor, and two were over at Webb Brothers. And on the day of the funeral, these guys were members of the Elks and the business folks, and they had a procession from the funeral parlor, and the funeral was held at the city auditorium. And Mayor Lucas asked that the entire city shut down when that funeral was going on. So the businesses shut down, the bank shut down during that time. The Daredevil. And you look at these shoes, you look at some of the shoes the young people are wearing today, and I'm thinking they could just well wear some of these lace-up boots again. But some of them I think are quite elegant, like this one with in the middle there, that looks good. But young Arthur was quite a daredevil, Arthur Lucas Jr. And he and his buddies would go climbing around and on things. And they'd climb up over their house, which was on the corner of Avenue A and First Street. And one day in the summer of 1918, Arthur was downtown climbing around on the store, and he's climbing up on that sign that was hanging out there, and he falls down. And he hits his head, and he gets knocked out, and they take him to the hospital, and he does survive. But young Arthur was quite a kid, it sounded like. Then the United States enters the war in 1917, and the troops are at Fort Lincoln here, and they're mustering and getting ready to go, and they're coming to town. And a good businessman would say, okay, what can we do to help those people? But what also can we do to make some money off of the people that are coming to town to say goodbye? So if you're coming to town on the train, the Lucas restroom, you can store your baggage in there. Whatever you got, you can store it in there. Out-of-town customers' terms, they weren't going to get any discounts, no rebates, one price on all their goods. But what we can do for the out-of-town guys, we'll pay you a one-way fare and a $25 purchase from our store. But if you pay $50 or more, we will do a two-way fare for you, and deliveries free anywhere in this and adjacent states. So free deliveries on products is not from stuff off the internet. A.W. Lucas started that here in Bismarck in 17, excuse me. Also, there's money to be made during war, and we needed wool and wool socks, and there was a lot of knitting. People would buy wool to knit into socks for the soldiers. And somehow A.W. Lucas became a distributor of yarn. And a lot of yarn would come into Bismarck, and then he would ship it out to someplace else. So you would, he must have made a bunch of money on that yarn business. Christian was a good young man, and he wanted to get into the aviation corps. He also liked to hunt. And one of his hunting partners was Max Kupitz, who was married to his Christian's mother's sister. So Max married a Kohler. Well, Max, in October 17, Max and Christian were out at Long Lake hunting ducks. And they were crawling through the grass with their shotguns, probably, like this, down on all fours. And Kupitz thought Christian was on that side of them or whatever, or he actually was on the other side. So Max had a shotgun on his hand that Christian was on, not knowing he was there. And the shotgun goes off and hits Christian in the knee. And this was sometime during the day. Well, to get back to Bismarck, I don't know how they got out to Long Lake, but they came back on the train. So they waited for the train. And that kind of quashed Christian's aviation plans for that year because he had to heal up, and it took quite a while to heal up. So we had a war Christmas that winter, 1918, and in the middle here it says, "There has never been a time when we have taken more pride in advertising our Christmas goods. It is a war Christmas, and every gift has been selected with that thought in mind, a thought of how practical and how useful that gift would be." So during the war, A.W. Lucas decided we're still going to sell stuff, but we're going to make sure it's practical and that people will come in and buy stuff. Then the war finishes, and the tone in advertising changes. Now for the merriest Christmas ever, a victory Christmas that will never be forgotten. So the theme here is now you can throw that practicality stuff out the window, and you can splurge and buy stuff. But that Christmas of 1918 was not merry for all. We lost a lot of soldiers from North Dakota and Bismarck in that war, so we're working through that. The influenza was also going on at that time, and that took lives of many of our young people here in North Dakota and Bismarck. And in October, Christian Lucas comes down with the influenza. And he's hospitalized at St. A's. And he's improving, he's getting better, and he gets to the point to where he's going to be able to go home. Then he goes home for a day or so and he gets ill again, and he comes back into the hospital. He's in the hospital and he receives notification that he's to report to, I think, the Twin Cities for naval aviator training. So his wish to be a pilot was about to come true. He never leaves the hospital, he dies. Christian, of the Lucas boys, Christian was one that he was up in management already in the store, and he was working in the store, and his dad was probably kind of grooming him to become a operating member of that store. Well, here's a painting that Rosemary Landsberger did, and it is in the library here. I think it's in the basement on the other side. July 4th, 1919, she dated it. And here's a picture I got from Beth Nodlin. Her company, at least a year ago, and I think they're still there, in the north side of the building on the right side of the photo. So you look at that sign up there, that's the sign that Arthur Lucas was climbing on when he fell off and knocked himself out on the concrete. So the Lucas family, they had several children. I've got those. It was Christian and Helen, Mary, Arthur, and Harold. Well, Helen fell in love with Frank Hedden. And in January 1921, they got married at the Lucas home in Bismarck here. And it was quite often weddings were held in the homes at that time, and this one was at the Lucas home. And the guests were there. The couple got married. They had their party. The wedding couple was upstairs, and they were going to go west by train. So they were going to go down to the Bismarck depot to get on the train and then take off someplace west for their honeymoon. Well, evidently there was some kind of thing that the wedding party did for the bridal couple as they're escorting them down to the train station, or maybe at the train station. And they knew when the train was coming through Bismarck here, and they knew what time they were supposed to get. Well, the time for the Bismarck train was getting close. And the wedding guests wondered where the couple was. Well, they snookered him. They snuck out the back door to Avenue B, where Arthur had a car running for him, and they get on the car and they drive across the river and get on the train over in Mandan and make it away. Buying trips. You know, the Lucas Company had buyers, the independent store, and they had buyers for a long time. So that AW or their department managers would go on buying trips, and there was this one to Chicago in the end of July 1923. And AW and his family had just returned from a trip to Yellowstone. And AW was in Chicago with plans to go on to New York City. And one of the guys from the store were there with him. They had some afternoon meetings, and AW went up to his room, and his other store employee went elsewhere. Then he goes up to get AW, and his door walks into his room, and AW was laying on his bed, fully clothed, and he had died. So he died in Chicago on a buying trip to Chicago. The word comes back to Bismarck, and everybody is this was a shock to our community. Some members of either the Masons or the Elks get on the train, go to Minneapolis so they could escort the body back to town. So they bring his body back to town, and then they have a funeral. And the Tribune had great stories on him and this time, and they had quotes from a lot of the people around town, and I just took a few of them, a few of the business people, so I'll read them. A.P. Lenhart, he always stood for the upbuilding of Bismarck. C.B. Little, one of our most useful citizens and a great loss to our city. Edmund Hughes, always loyal, fair, and conscientious. Dr. Quain, his inexhaustible and jovial good nature. F.A. Knowles, there is not a businessman or citizen who will not miss him. F.A. Conklin, a loss to all of us that is difficult to fully realize at this time. And his partner, William O'Hara, said, his worth to the community is so well known that it seems almost superfluous to try to estimate it. It was a tragedy and then now the family, and Kohler, C.H. Kohler was the president of the company from the beginning on up until the death of A.W. So Kohler was kind of making things work, and they needed somebody to be overall in charge of the store. And they find a gentleman by the name of A.W. Mundy, who was working for the Golden Rule store in the Twin Cities. And October 23, it says, A.W. Mundy of St. Paul is in Bismarck on business. So he was probably up here starting to put things together. Kohler was in the Twin Cities, and it's likely that Kohler and Lucas knew. So in 24, Kohler was in Minneapolis, and he sends a telegram back, just closed with overstocked Twin City jobbers at my own prices on a wonderful variety, new seasonable goods, including novelty, wash goods, newest colorings, latest designs in big lot domestics, underwear, hosiery, blankets, and many other lines. Get basement ready for big sale, announce coming sale through papers. And in 1925, the Mundy family acquires the store. So Mrs. Lucas and C.H. Kohler, they sell their company to the Mundys, and that's Arthur Mundy, Arthur's wife Dora, and Arthur's brother Edward. The Mundys were from the Iowa area, Spirit Lake, Iowa. Edward had come to Kramer, North Dakota in 1904, then went to Schaefer in McKenzie County, and then to Watford City and he was involved in banking and land transactions, and he comes to Bismarck to help his brother run the store, and I think Edward had some part ownership in it also. The lunchroom. I'm guessing a lot of you people ate at the lunchroom. Okay. Okay. The lunchroom was the idea of Dora Mundy. And it was not an actual company store at the beginning. They worked out some kind of a deal with the Ladies' Guild of the St. George's Episcopal Church, of which there's books over here today you can buy on that church. And the Episcopal ladies served lunch daily from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. in the store. So they must have made some money. But anyhow, that was proven to be such a good success. By the end of 27, the Mundys said, we're going to open up the lunchroom as part of our store and run it ourselves. So Dora Mundy's idea for the lunchroom, and the St. George ladies got it going. Bathing suits, handkerchiefs, fine furs and coats, whatever you wanted there in ways of outerwear you could get. In 1930, Edward Mundy died here in Bismarck, and one of his pallbearers was Governor George Schaefer. His body was taken to Iowa for burial there. The A.W. Lucas Company, one of the feelings I had is that they always had elegant goods, especially for the ladies of our community. And this middle one I like because I watch a lot of old movies on Turner Classic Movies, and you look at the 1930s movies, and these ladies are wearing these elegant backless dresses. And I always wondered, how did that work? Well, I found this ad, and okay, that's how everything stayed where we're supposed to stay in the front. Maybe. But we know now, I know now that in Bismarck, our ladies in Bismarck were wearing the dresses that I would see on the movies from that time. So we are elegant ladies here in Bismarck. They sold bicycles, swimsuits, bicycle accessories, model airplanes that really fly in the upper right-hand corner, this one on the left here. There's probably nothing that that store didn't sell. In 1937, A.W. and Dora were on a buying trip in Chicago. And he buys this boat. It's a 40-foot cabin cruiser that could hold about 8 people. And he buys it in Chicago. This picture, this middle picture or story comes from the Bismarck Tribune, but the picture was taken by a Chicago photographer. And the girls, Margaret and Jane, that story and their picture was in a Minneapolis paper. So the Minneapolis paper and then the Bismarck one talks about Captain Mundy, and he bought this boat, and they're going to go cruising down the Mississippi River, down to the Gulf of Mexico, and maybe up the East Coast to Boston or whatever. But I don't think they ever put that boat in the water. This was May. If I found stuff in the paper, Margaret comes home from college in June. Jane was at a convent high school in the Twin Cities at that time. She had been home before. Margaret goes someplace else in the summer. So I think he probably sold that boat, because if they would have been on that boat, there would have been something in the Tribune about them on that cruise, and they never did. A.W. and the Fugitives. In the summer of 37, there was a store, a Bergeson. I think they did some clothing and stuff in town here. And Mrs. Bergeson and her husband running that store, they found this suspicious guy in their store whose pockets were bulging with what looked like neckties and stuff and socks that he took from the store. So he leaves the store and she starts following him, and she tells her husband to get the cops. And she's following this guy around the streets of downtown Bismarck, and A.W. Mundy is out in front of his store, so she gets him involved in the chase. And pretty soon, and he has to go help get the cops or follow another guy, and the man she's trailing goes into a pool hall. Well, she won't go into a pool hall, so she waits for him to come out. So eventually, they end up catching these guys and the police at the Patterson Hotel. But they didn't have any of the goods on them. And the Bergesons, her husband said the stuff that he took were my old socks and stuff, ties from home that I was going to throw away. In the fall of 1937, Margaret Mundy marries L. Torrance in Wisconsin. So Torrance then becomes a person in the store. So you marry into the family, you get into the store. And they sold linoleum here in the basement. In 1940, they needed more space, and A.W. had to decide, am I going to build a new store or remodel? And they decided to remodel the store, and that's when the second story got added on to their building. L. Torrance was an aviator, and he entered the Army as a lieutenant, and he was a pilot, and he flew heavy aircraft or aircraft that would haul supplies. And he was stationed in India, and he flew from India into China, so they flew over the Himalayas. His unit, they delivered goods that way. And so were these ads, let's win this war, how to conserve your shirts and ties. Even though Lucas wants you to buy from them, they're also going to tell you how to conserve your shirts and ties. During the war, items are still needed. These lap trays, they look like TV trays, but they're peddling these in 44, and it says, under that, it says, how to entertain without a maid and like it. So if you're a hostess, you could serve your guests in the living room their little goodies and stuff on these lap trays. And back to school clothes, you always have to have new clothes. Many of you are like us. We got new clothes at Easter and at school time. And Pyrex is showing up now, these glassware. L. Torrance's units gets a presidential citation in 1944 for all their efforts during the war and flying supplies over the hump, it was referred to. Nylon stockings weren't available, but now you got rayon stockings you can get. And good wool blankets. World War I, Lucas had an ad, can we still get wool blankets? And he had them for sale in World War II. Can I get good wool blankets? Yes, we got them here at our store. My dad probably never set foot in the Lucas store, but this is one of our favorite pictures of him, and when I saw this ad for this hat, I had to put my dad in there. And he probably dressed, this might have been the best suit he ever owned. And us kids, we call it his gangster picture. He's standing there, he's got a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, but you know, that's the type of suit I'm guessing that the Lucas Company wanted men to get and to buy. Al was home. He continued to fly. He had some stunt aircraft. And in about 48, 49, I came across the story of the Flying Farmers were having their tour from Moffett, and they landed at the McDonald farm east of Bismarck here. And Al and one of his flying buddies, they went out there with the aircraft and they did stunt flying out at that time. But you could get a radio at the Lucas store. Al gets called back into service for the Korean War. Sunbeam Mixmasters started showing up in their store at this time. Today we have, what is it? What is the KitchenAid? Yeah, yeah. KitchenAid's a big one, but Sunbeam was a big one. At $39 for that Sunbeam Mixmaster. Yeah, that put a dent in your pocket change, all right. In 1951, you know, they continued to have fashion shows, but this was kind of a fashion show in the newspaper at this time. Many of the stores in Bismarck, and I don't know who coordinated it, if they all did together or if the Tribune did, but they all had pictures of people wearing their clothing, and that was all in the Tribune on March 14th, 1951. So I took these here, and the one on the left, this is titled, "This is Serious." And to me, it's like, we don't want to do this. And those are the Torrance girls. So it's Nancy, Bonnie, and Judy Torrance. The middle one, the lady with the hats, is Patsy Brown. And on the right, sparkling as spring, is Shirley Stabler. Somebody mentioned Hazel Eastman to me, and she showed up in one of these photos also. L. Torrance gets out of his Korean service in 1952. He gets home on September 10th. On September 12th, 1952, he's made president of the company. So A.W. is now officially retired, and L is in charge. This State Historical Society has these photos, and I was up there. I've been up there doing some stuff, work on old highway department items, and I told Emily Ergen of the archives that I'm working on the Lucas stuff, and she pulls out this Lucas box for me. And they are working on scanning that collection. So there's some photos, and we'll be getting to the scrapbooks here. And so this was at the 53rd anniversary. There's anniversary cake there, and it was in 1952. So the scrapbooks in this collection of stuff that Emily showed me, there were scrapbooks that somebody in the company did from about 1945 through 1955 or 56. And they were getting in pretty tough shape, so all of that stuff is being scanned also. And there were quite a few pictures in there also. Some of them I used tonight. But once they all get scanned in, they will be available to the public. So here's the three presidents up till 54, A.W. Lucas, A.W. Mundy, and L. Torrance. On the bottom there is the smaller pictures. There are a lot of department heads. But there's three notable employees I want to just talk about a little bit. Two of them were 50-year employees with Lucas Company. Elizabeth Field, she was one of the 50-year employees. And at this time, she was in Notions and Art Goods. The other one is Elma Sundquist. She started in about 1905 and worked for them up until she became really ill in 59. and Elma worked her way up to be the secretary-treasurer of the company. Elma never married. She enjoyed sports. She had listened to basketball on the radio, and she liked baseball. In 1935, when Bismarck Neil Churchill had that great baseball team, A.W. Mundy buys the first season ticket for that year, and he gives that to Elma. So Elma has the very first season ticket to watch the baseball here in Bismarck that year. Shortly before she died in January 1960, in 58 or 59, she receives a baseball that was autographed by all the American League umpires. So there was 8 teams in the American League, so if they had, there'd be 4 games at a time, maybe 4, so there's maybe 16, at least 16 umpires to sign that. It'd be interesting to know where that baseball ended up. Elma also listened to basketball on the radio, and she'd go to games, and Fay Brown comes to work for the company. And Elma says, I listened to you back in 1930 when you did play-by-play on state tournaments. Fay Brown did the first radio play-by-play of basketball in North Dakota. And that was a 1930 state tournament, which I believe was held at today's Youth Correctional Center. I did find a comment that there was some play-by-play that was done the year before, but the announcers only called out the numbers of the players. They never did their names. And Fay actually did the names, so he's the guy that gets credit for doing the real first play-by-play of a basketball game in North Dakota. Fashion shows were held in many places, and this is in the Lucas lunchroom, about 1954. And if you ate there, you probably know where your table was, your favorite table. Or walking down. These photos were in the collection that's being scanned. There wasn't any indication of who this model was in front here. So if you know her, I'd like to know that. But an interesting thing on the photo on the right in the background is all the cigarettes that are being sold. Everything is cigarettes. But fashion shows were held in many places. There's got a photo of one that was up at Riverdale, probably in the school there. And there was one at Boniface Auditorium over at St. A's. And it's a real neat photograph because you see some models from the stage, and the photo is looking towards the back, and sitting in the back row are the sisters. Some of them wearing white habits, the medical ones, and some in the black. And they also have a menu from that time. So this is a real find to come across that menu and the store directory. So did you eat there? Did you go to the store to eat and then shop, or did you go there to shop and eat? Probably some of both. And if you look in the lower right-hand corner of this menu here, it says look for today's find. And also they're promoting, they are Bismarck Shopping Center in the lower right-hand corner. So what is today's find? Well, it's like the blue light special. If you were in Kmart, like we all were, and all of a sudden this bell goes off and the blue light's going on, well, it's the blue light special. Well, in the Lucas store, it was tomorrow's find, where in the Tribune there would be something that's going to have a special price tomorrow only. You come in. They were selling china in the basement, and there was, two on this day in April 18th, 1955. There was 2 demonstrations that were going on. The top one, Mr. Carl Knobloch, factory representative of the Picard China Company, will demonstrate the care and use of fine china. And Mr. Dick Oppegard of Iroquois Casual China will show you how you can cook and serve food in the same dish. But Karl Knobloch has an impact upon the Lucas Company, and that's coming up here in a bit. From about 48 to 54, the Lucas Company won several awards on a national basis from the Brand Names Corporation Company, or promoters. Lucas, one of their big promotion is that we're promoting the brand names and they're the best. We're promoting the best in the brand names, and they did win several awards. And at least one time they went to New York City to receive the award. Fay Brown was there, and it was in the Waldorf Astoria Hotel where he received that award. And Cuteness Sells. This is from 1960 when there's quite a few pictures in there. On the left, the short guy is Richard Torrance. Somebody recognize him? The tall kid is Mark Springen. In the middle, Cinderella Come True, that's Jill Shirley. And on our right, her name is Mary Wald. And this is still the same paper. And these young ladies on the left, going from left to right, is Jennifer Wheeler, Don Johnson, Kern Wheeler, and Mary Beth Wheeler. What?
The second one on the right would be Kim.
Kim? Okay. Well, good, because what I could read out of the thing, I came up with Kern, but if Kim is the right one, that's good to know. Okay, that's good. And this lady here, all the caption, all it said was Mary. So I'm not certain if it was Mary Wald or somebody. But when you're advertising your store and you want to sell stuff, you play any angle you can come up with. And the caption here talks about, if you're wearing this dress at a party, the stag line will stop. You'll stagger the stag line. So the men are going to think you're most beautiful in there. And this ad over here then in December, they want men only to come in on the men's shopping night, where you can get gift boxes, you can buy lingerie for your wife or girlfriend and party dresses and stuff. Take a bow and drink the whiskey. In 1992, there was a story in the Tribune reminiscing on the Lucas Company, and there was a lady in there, Eva Kottre, K-O-T-T-R-E. And she worked in the store, and she was one of several, but her stories I got a kick out of. And she was working a till, and one day her till was $500 short. And she was scared, and she went to L and told him this had happened, and she was nervous, and I'm guessing it was really hard on her because somehow she lost $500. L tells her, I took it out of there and I never told you. So he says, you need whiskey. He pours her a glass of whiskey and says, drink it. And she said, okay, I drank the whiskey. And another time, she prided herself in not ever accepting a rubber check. And then one day it comes that I got this rubber check. Well, the next day, she told the boss, and the next day they're having their team meeting, and L tells Eva, get up. You accepted a rubber check yesterday. Yeah. The first one you ever? Yes. Well, that's okay. Take a bow and everybody clap. That stuff is going to happen once in a while. 1963, how to get to the store must have been becoming an issue. So in their ad, they showed where all the parking lots are and how easy you can get to the store. Cuteness Sells again. This is Miss Bismarck. From what I got off of Tribune, it was Kitty Bayer or Bayer, B-A-I-E-R. They also had, when Miss North Dakota was in here, they would sponsor her too. In the mid-1960s, Margaret and Elle divorce. Within a couple years, both of them remarry. Elle marries Elsie Lee from Mandan, and Margaret marries Carl Knobloch, the China guy. Yeah, yeah. The expansion begins. They started adding stores all in the downtown area. Lucas Fashions opens in 1966. I've seen some advertisements where they referred to it as Lucas Budget Fashions. Lucas Fabric Shop on 4th opens in 1971. We talk about Christmas. You know, I have grumble when I see on the Hallmark Channel my Judy is watching Christmas in July movies and what have you. So when does Christmas begin? Lucas Company says Christmas begins in July. So I guess the Hallmark movies, Christmas in July is okay. But holiday needlework, yeah, to get your holiday needlework in, you need to start that in July. Lucas Menswear opens on Broadway in 1968. So it's on the north side. 4th Street is just ahead there. So that's that picture. 2018, photo from the same location. The building's still the same. That little overhang is still there. So this side of the block still looks pretty good. Crazy Days sale, they had Crazy Days. Everybody would dress up. Some accounts are that L. Torrance would dress up as a woman, and he did such a good job that they didn't know it was him. and there's a picture at the archives that will be scanned of the whole group of them in their Crazy Days costume, and then several others, so those will be available. But in late December 1968, L was out west, and he's coming back to Bismarck. And somewhere west of maybe in that New Salem, Glen Allen area, he gets stuck or has car trouble, and he wants help. So he gets out of his car and walks across the median to the westbound lane, and he gets hit. The visibility was poor. The young guy was just on leave from the service, was driving the car, and he swerved one way. L must have been in the driving lane because the driver swerves to the shoulder. L goes back to the shoulder, and he gets hit, and he dies. And L was an important man to the community, but all the Tribune had on him was just a little bit, the day after he died, when the funeral was going to be, a little bit about his life and what he did, but not much more. I missed another wedding. I think it might have been up there. So in 1960, Michael Speaks marries Judy. That was 1960. And I should have got that into 1961. So anyhow, Michael Speaks is working for the company. And if you marry into the family, you get to be part of the company. So Speaks gets moved up the company, and he ends up taking over the company of the store. Here, 1975, we'll start with the right side. Those three ladies from left to right, according to the Tribune, is Lori Larson, Giselle Lehman, and Arlene Thompson. This photo on the left here was taken at the Holiday Inn. And this photo, there was a fashion show put on the Mary College Ancilla Club, which was a club that would bring in speakers and then they would raise money. But two of North Dakota's great ladies took part in this event here, the Mary College fashion show on this day in November. On the left is Mrs. Carl Baumgartner, and on the far right was Mrs. Dwayne Berger, and in the middle is Shyla Schaefer. And the music that day was a choir performed by Mary College, directed by Sister Thomas Welder. So this point in time, November 1969, for this one event, two ladies who had a huge impact upon the state of North Dakota came together just as regular folk doing something here in this fashion show. So here's a street view of the Lucas Company. The Lucas and the Woodmansey store is just the way this photo is taken. That looks kind of okay. Here's what it looked like a year ago. Oh, messed up, isn't it? Yeah. Down in the lower right-hand corner, use the phone or the envelope. Almost from the beginning, they took mail orders. So all the way through the technology of the day, telephone or mail, you could order stuff from the Lucas Company. The four stores all lined up, and you can see on the map, the top one, the little gray one, was Lucas Menswear, then the main store, then Lucas Fabrics, and then Lucas Fashions. In 1976, Michael and Judy divorce. The Main Street store burns in February '79, and there was another store next to it, and the fire started in the next store, and I can't remember what the name of it was. I read it this afternoon, but there was some heat pipes, some hot duct work that the fire marshal said either some stuff might have got stacked too close to it that started the fire. So in 2018, that space is still empty. It's a parking lot now. But then in '79, they move out of downtown. It's what is the big thing. You move out of town. The stores, the department stores were moving. They move up to Gateway Mall. Here's what it looked like last year. Harbor Freight is in there. I think the west side is still sitting empty right now. It's always been difficult for some stores to get going there. They would always have an anniversary sale. 1980 was the last anniversary sale, or 81st. The lunchroom closes in 1980. And the downtown store, they closed that then in 1982 as they were selling out. So the end is near. And again, there's very elegant clothing they're selling. Michael Speaks has complete control of the company. The kids, the Torrance kids, all had some shares. Richard sells his. He was out in California. He needed some money. I think he was buying a house out there, and Mike Speaks buys him out. So by this time, Michael Speaks had over 60% of the company. And so he's just making decisions on his own without consulting the girls. And he works out a deal with Eckstein's out of Moorhead for Eckstein's to buy the store. The girls were not happy. They were really upset that this was happening. Nothing they could do. So by the end of October or September, almost 83 years from when it started, Lucas closes. Eckstein's buys the store. Within a year, they're out of business. Herberger's takes over and has a store in there for a while. This is the end of my talk. And I wasn't paying attention to 4th Street until last week. And we were downtown, and this remodeling of this building. I like downtown. Our downtown is doing good. I'm glad I have trouble finding a parking space on the street. But the architect or person who designed this remodel should have his or her license removed. You know, they put glass back in there. You know, the Woodmancy's remodel kind of kept the same entrance in the center, indented a little bit. And if the new owner is going to this expense, and they put a lot of glass in there, they could have easily done something similar to what was there originally. It really got messed up, but I hope they get a tenant in there and keep it going, but it just makes me sad to see it look like that.